Welcome to Conversations Different, a podcast from the Santa Fe New Mexican focusing on the fascinating people and places of northern New Mexico. I am Inez Russell Gomez, and this week we are talking to scientist Dr. Jeanne Fair of Los Alamos National Laboratory about her work studying infectious disease, whether among birds or humans. This is first in a new feature of this podcast, interviews with some of the smartest people around, the scientists who help make sense of our world. Welcome, Dr. Fair.
Well, welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
One question that was suggested by your fine communications team that I think I'm going to use because it is a really good one. The lab we think of as a weapons laboratory, a defense laboratory. So why is the study of avian flu, things in birds, why is that part of the lab's mission?
That's a great question to start out with. There's a lot of science done at the laboratory, ranging from environmental sciences, studying volcanoes, studying bioscience. So a lot of bioscience and a lot of technologies have been developed at the laboratory, over 60 or 70 years. So it first started out with how do we understanding radiation and the effects on humans and animals, that's sort of where it started. But anything that is sort of a threat to our society, whether that's global security or national security, that is within the mission space of the laboratory.
Because part of what the lab's job is to keep us safe, in a sense.
Absolutely, yeah. So whether it's a pandemic and preventing a pandemic, or it's something else, with the changing environment, a rapidly changing environment, and understanding that so that we can adapt as a society using the best tools and data that's available.
Okay. And it seems like in your work, you're studying how the changing environment is affecting the health of the birds around us, and then what diseases might or might not jump from birds to humans or to other animals. So can you talk about what that involves?
Yeah, sure. So the umbrella of my interest in my research for over 30 years now has been to understand how stress impacts our immune systems. And most of that is in wildlife. And so that stress may be a rapidly changing environment, it may be fires changing your environment, it may be heat, food limitation. And then that makes us more susceptible to infectious diseases. And so understanding the ecology of infectious diseases in wildlife. And this is primarily with what we call zoonotic diseases. And zoonotic diseases are just that it's a singular pathogen or bacteria or virus that is in both an animal and in humans. And so coronavirus are a great example of a zoonotic pathogen, as are influenzas.
Okay. And because they're both in animals and humans, that means it can go cross species. Is that what I'm hearing? And you have to make this very basic for non-scientists like me.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's so, it might be circulating in an animal population. So coronaviruses are a great example of this. They're in bats and other wildlife around the world. And so they do change and they can adapt to have a human host. And then the next step is then for humans to be able to easily transmit them to each other. So there's sort of steps that it goes from between being fully just in animals to maybe it's in humans and it can affect humans here or there, but not transmissible, to becoming fully transmissible between humans. And that's where we get a pandemic.
Right. And what I understood in my reading over the years about pandemics is that when you really get in trouble is if it's both a virus that's potentially lethal and transmits quickly.
Absolutely. Yes. And as we saw in the coronavirus pandemic, we can get a lot of variability with a virus. And so in that one, you could either have zero symptoms as a host, as a human, or you could die from it.
Yeah.
And then everything in between. Yeah. A lot of viruses are a little bit more narrow with how they affect human, population. Influenzas tend to be a little bit more narrow. So when you have a flu, you really stay home. You really feel sick.
Yeah.
And so with the avian influenzas, it actually is pretty virulent, the current form of it. And so that's why scientists around the world are concerned.
Right. You're hoping that it stays mostly with the birds and that kind of thing, and not get into humans.
Yeah, that's what we always hope for, right?
Yep.
Yeah. But we know with the avian influenza that's happened in the last 2 years, and particularly in 2014, that it's now in our agricultural animals. And so a lot of people probably heard about the dairy cows in most states in the West. And so, that's one step closer to humans. We interact with them quite a bit. And so we could, get it directly from an animal. And that's where primarily the cases of this avian influenza that we're concerned about is a direct, real close contact with animals.
And I had read that, I guess in Missouri, they just diagnosed a case where they don't see that the human was actually in contact with a sick animal, so that might be spreading among humans. We don't know yet. Is that right?
Yes, you are up on the news. So when I talk about being transmitted between humans, that's his next step, to potentially a pandemic. And so that case in Missouri was very concerning for scientists. We all heard about it immediately. And so figuring out, how did this person really get it? They had, supposedly no contact with animals. Did they get it from another person? Can they ever identify that person and where they got it potentially? So there's a lot of sort of sleuthing that goes on with that.
Yeah, I've been watching that because I'm not paranoid about pandemics, but after living through the last 5 years, you're definitely, I think all of us, a little more careful. I love your advice in a Reporter article that you did a few years back. Wash your hands.
Yeah, sure. Yes. Yeah.
And I was, I always thought I was a clean person, but I tell you, once the pandemic started, I realized I had not been washing my hands nearly as well.
Especially early on, we didn't really understand how it was transmitted. Was it more, through contact with your hands and putting it to your mouth, or was it more just breathing in air where somebody had sneezed or coughed or even just breathed?
Yeah. That's what was wonderful about it in a way, is just what we learned in the moment and adding to that knowledge, which will help us if anything happens next. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so learning how these viruses, like a coronavirus or influenza, how they are evolving and changing. That's why we want to try to track them. To see exactly how their genetic makeup is changing. Is it mutating, or is it actually combining with a different type of influenza? And that's what we're most afraid of. And we call that type of recombining, we call it a reassortment. And so that can happen, like if you had a human or a pig, often are a good host animal, where pigs get all of our seasonal influenzas that we get every year. They get the same strains or subtypes that we get because they're part of our human society. And so a pig can have a seasonal influenza and then get exposed to an avian influenza, and then that's where they would get this reassortment. And so then you get an influenza that is, part type of a human seasonal influenza with those characteristics, and then also part of this avian influenza.
So that would be a more potent combination.
Yes, that's what we're trying to prevent.
Right. Okay. On that note, we'll take a break and be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
HomeWise is a local New Mexico nonprofit committed to increasing the availability of affordable homes for working people in Santa Fe. Our HomeWise Homes communities provide quality-built, energy-efficient homes with up to 40% of the houses reserved for modest-income buyers. Our newest community, Miraflores, offers single-family homes with spacious backyards, a family-friendly environment, and convenient access to the Tierra Contenta Trail Network. Standard features include low-E vinyl windows, stainless steel appliances, granite kitchen countertops, a tankless water heater, and more. Contact us today to learn more about Miraflores. Call 505-983-9473 or visit us at homewise.org. Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 188231.
We are back with Conversations Different, talking to Dr. Jeanne Fair, a scientist who is helping us stay safe by finding out what awful diseases could come and attack us through the air and animals and all of those things. I want to talk about one of the things that seemed really important to me about your work, though, is that it's cooperative in nature, that the scientists in Los Alamos are working with scientists all around the world. And this is you recognize humanity is facing these problems potentially.
Absolutely. So we always tend to think that a threat anywhere is a threat everywhere. And so that if we are working with what we call partner countries around the world to build their biosurveillance capabilities, their diagnostic laboratories, just how they can detect a disease and mitigate it, that we're helping everybody. So we're keeping our shores safe. And so we're stopping an outbreak and potentially a pandemic everywhere. And so this is a program that the U.S. and other countries like Canada and Germany, there are other countries that have this called cooperative threat reduction, where we're trying to help other countries, build their capacity and their capabilities for diagnostics and understanding diseases in the environment.
Yeah, I think that's really important in a time when we were becoming somewhat isolationist. This isn't about politics, but it's just that if the bug comes over on a ship or on a bird flying in here, we're all going to get it. And it doesn't matter whether it started here or there. I mean, the Spanish flu, I guess the first case was in Kansas or something.
Yeah, there's still debate on 1918 flu. I mean, there was a World War I was going on. And so was it maybe over in France? Was it here in Kansas potentially? But we do know that had an avian influenza origin, and that there was most probably swine or pigs involved. And so it's sort of setting up what we're trying to prevent right now.
And that flu spread a lot because of the World War, but we didn't have the kind of international travel back then. Absolutely, so that's a danger in the modern world.
Yeah, exactly. Things travel much faster and farther. And wildlife, they don't know boundaries,
right.
And so particularly birds. And so for these diseases that can cross borders through wildlife, we call those transboundary diseases. And yeah, that's another case where you have now this avian influenza, which started in Asia, over 25 years ago, actually. It started in poultry and then got into the wildlife, into the wild birds. And then it sort of just hung out for like over a decade. Nothing much happened with it too much until about 3 years ago.
Okay.
About 2020. It came back into wildlife and it had changed, become more virulent, or to be able to kill more of the wild birds that were getting it. And now we've seen it, now it's everywhere. It's even in Antarctica, and so some of the penguins.
Okay, I was going to say, what could it be in Antarctica? Yeah, the ice, the penguins, yeah.
So it has reached everywhere.
Oh.
The sort of version that's here now in North America, that's now into the dairy cows, into the agriculture, but also in poultry and our wild birds. And it's also wreaking havoc along the coast of South America. And it's in sort of sea mammals. So there was a big die-off of elephant seal pups.
Oh my goodness!
And so now we see it everywhere. So, now the toothpaste is out of the tube.
And the next step, human to human, perhaps, doesn't have to happen, but it could happen.
Yeah, it doesn't have to happen, and that's sort of the positive. Optimistic view that I tend to have, that if we really take this opportunity to understand how it's tracking and do biosurveillance and sample, and whether that's in the environment, so we can do the sequencing to look at the actual genetic makeup of the virus and keep track of it.
And that's like on a computer in a lab kind of thing? Okay.
Yeah, we can actually go, oh, here's where the virus has changed. This is a big deal. And then we can come in with mitigations, particularly if it's in the animals. We can do things to close off a farm, or we can call animals, or, a lot of different things we can do. But we don't just have to just wait for it to be a pandemic.
Okay. Now, is it harder to do the things you need to do, considering that because of the coronavirus pandemic, so many people did their own research and decided to take ivermectin or not wear masks or whatever? How do you get people to trust scientists and public health?
That is the biggest question in science right now, absolutely.
Yeah.
When we think of these viruses, I mean, they're invisible. We don't see them. We can't. And so if you got coronavirus, if you got COVID, you don't know where you got it. It's pretty rare that you know where you got it. Because
Yes.
maybe your kid came home from school sneezing, you know they gave it to you. But most of the time, none of us know where we got it. And so they're invisible. And so how do you study them? I mean, it by itself is a difficult thing. You're trying to look at these invisible things, these viruses, in animals, in agricultural animals, in the environment, or in a global scale. And so the science itself is hard.
What was shocking to me is that it seemed, not that I'm rosy about the past and how great people were to each other, but it seemed to me at one point we wouldn't mind a little inconvenience, even if it wasn't like perfectly known that it was going to work, as long as we were protecting other people. And it got to where if it inconvenienced me a bit, then I wasn't going to do it, you know? And I think about all the people who could have gotten sick or who had not gotten sick if you just wore your mask in the supermarket, or all those, you know, little public health things they told us to do. And we couldn't get people to do that.
Yeah, you know, you have your infectious disease specialist and your ecologist, and, you know, that's one type of scientist, but all of us now, when we sit down at the table, we all want to make sure that there's a social scientist there, there's a political scientist there, there's a psychologist there, because that is really where the biggest unknowns are right now, is how will society react? We know how they reacted a few years ago, but how will they react now? A lot of unknowns, you know, because we carry the trauma from the past, all of us, and we carry the beliefs that we might have gained in the last few years. And so how we'll all respond is really a big unknown.
Yeah, I'm really interested in you know, the different research that's going on. Like, I knew someone who was retired and living his great life in Mexico and got COVID, went to the hospital and was saying, I'm getting better, everything's great, I can't wait to tell you what this journey was like. The next day he had that relapse and he was dead. 63, 64. You know, I'd worked with him at a paper in Florida a million years ago. And I think that made me realize, oh my goodness, this is serious. But if you were a person who didn't know anybody who got sick, you might not ever think it was serious.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, it's the beliefs that we pick up from who, you know, everybody around us. You know, and we have this pandemic that we've all lived through. But my grandfather's sister died in 1918.
Wow.
In Kansas, actually.
Oh, wow.
And so I often, when I lecture, I will show basically the mausoleum that says Fair on it.
Oh.
And I will read the obituary of this little girl, and she was 6 years old.
Oh, that's so sad.
And but everybody in the room, all of us, have some ancestor that died in 1918.
Yep.
And particularly in New Mexico, we had a lot of our New Mexican populations were more susceptible.
And the Pueblos were affected just as during the coronavirus pandemic, the Navajo Nation, etc. Yeah, my grandpa, though, what he did is he buried dead people. They wouldn't no one would go near the bodies, so he ended up there was a group of men, I guess, that did it as a service in Las Vegas, and that's what he did. And for whatever reason, he didn't catch it, but it was really interesting what that time did to people and how rapidly people were dying. Yeah.
So we want to remember the past so that we don't
repeat it.
And so on the science side, then, you know, how can we collect the data to prevent this and understand it better? Every pathogens, whether it's a bacteria or a virus, they're all different. And how they affect us is different. And so that's why it's so hard to make generalizations. Like, we all wish we could, but every outbreak, every pandemic will be different. And so, but understanding that takes a little time. And so better to do it before it turns into a pandemic and, you know, all hands on deck. Let's now figure this out together. Cooperatively. That's part of my favorite part, is actually working with teams and working with people. And New Mexico actually has a great history of this from 1993 with the hantavirus outbreak. I mean, New Mexico, and I've studied this actually and talk about it in some of my publications, and is that, you know, what happened in 1993 with how New Mexicans came together from our New Mexico Department of Health, working with the University of New Mexico, working with Texas Tech, working with all these players. Within 17 days, we had it figured out that this was hantavirus. We didn't think it was here. We found out it was here. It's hantavirus. It's in a rodent. It was shed in their feces, and they probably got it sweeping.
I remember that story so well because I had just moved home I'd lived in Florida, and I'd come back to Albuquerque, and I gave 2 stories to one of my reporters, and one was this young guy died, or the young girl died, and he died, and then she died at his funeral, like right after. And I said, "This is weird. You need to go figure this out." And she blew me off because I was just the assistant city editor. And then like a week later, Leslie Linthicum of the Journal had the big stories about hantavirus. And then we jumped all over it and sent people to the Navajo reservation, and we got out there first. And we then spent the next 2 months doing almost nothing but reporting on hantavirus. And you're absolutely right, the knowledge that was gained so quickly.
And that was only through working together. And
yes.
One of the reasons I've studied this team is not because of the the epidemic. It was really about how they worked together, and how they collaborated and brought different fields and disciplines so quickly on board, and so that's sort of why I studied. And so all those New Mexican and the Albuquerque Journal, all those articles, I've actually sifted through all of them, looking through and reading those stories.
Yeah, we were exhausted. It was a fascinating time though, and what I tell people right now is that it was a very wet summer. And that's when we get hantavirus again. So be very careful when you go outside.
Yes, this next year. And that was part of this team. This team stayed together for over 30 years, where they did tons of science. They created institutes. They just did all these things together because they loved working together and solving problems. And so not only did they better understand hantavirus and the ecology over decades, but they did a lot of other things together as well.
And on that note, we'll take a quick break and be back with a final segment of Conversations Different.
Thanks, Inez. This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. We hope you're enjoying this episode of Conversations Different with Inez Russell Gomez. Great local content is only possible with a talented staff dedicated to bringing you the best local content possible. For that staff to do its work, we need your support by subscribing to the Santa Fe New Mexican. If you're already a subscriber, thank you. And if not, there's never been a better time to subscribe. In addition to our home-delivered newspaper that comes with full digital access, we also provide digital-only subscriptions for SantaFeNewMexican.com. We'll also be releasing more online-only audio and video programming moving forward. The Santa Fe New Mexican has been here for nearly 175 years, and we want to continue being your source for local news and information. Visit us at SantaFeNewMexican.com/subscribe or call us at 505-986-3010. Thank you.
We are back with Conversations Different, talking to Dr. Jeanne Fair about her work understanding how disease and infections work, and a little bit about the stresses that will make, let's say, a bird more liable to get sick and to spread things. That seems to me a really important thing, especially, again, in the denialism of human beings that there's nothing changing in the world, the climate's the same, yet you have birds not being able to find the food they normally get, or it's hotter. And all of those things are making a difference to their lives.
Yeah, I started studying this. It became an interest to me because I wanted to know why after finals week I would always get sick. Like I had a great finals week and I was stressed, but then the week after I'd be sick and I was like, what, I'm supposed to be on spring break. And so I wanted to understand that. How does our immune system respond to stress? And so now, particularly with migratory birds, so in 2020 we had actually what we're calling a mortality event.
Is that when all the birds died? Yeah.
That's when all the birds died. And so they were basically coming through. It was super hot. It was over 100 degrees of most of the eastern New Mexico and in Colorado. And then it got super cold. And so it was almost freezing the next day. And there was a ton of fires in the area. Much smoke over in Arizona and here in New Mexico. And it was just too much. And so these migratory birds literally dropped out of the sky. And so it was...
Including in my yard.
Yeah, and so it's thousands. And so in response to that, we're starting to think about how do we define what an ecological disaster is. And so we actually have a program now at New Mexico State University, and that's on avian migration. And that's to better understand ecological disasters and what are these stresses that wildlife populations, each stress on its own, you can handle fine.
Right.
But, you're limited from food and you're really low weight because there's been a drought and there hasn't been any food, and so you're already not in good condition, and it's super hot, and then there's more predators, or all these things add up, and just like they do in our own lives when we feel overwhelmed.
That's right. You don't get enough sleep.
Oh, yeah.
Your friend gets sick and yells at you or whatever, and all of those things come together.
Too many deadlines, you've committed to too many things, and then all of a sudden, you're sick.
Yeah. I wonder what we can do as people trying to be healthy, take care of our families, to wade through all the information and misinformation that's out there. So we know there's the flu that's out there in the dairy cows. Do I need to not eat cheese? I mean, what should I do to protect myself and hopefully stop it from going into humans? I mean, don't pet the cow at the state fair. What is your advice just for us to make sense of everything?
The National Academy of Sciences, I was on a panel for 2 years recently, and it was about mis and disinformation and how do we help as scientists combat. Misinformation is one thing and disinformation is a whole entirely other thing. And really it still comes down to trusting your sources that you go to. So whether that, most of it's online, of course. So whether it's, a local newspaper you trust, or, a major newspaper or in a major news outlet, or going right to the scientific literature. Now that's harder because a lot of these papers would need...
They're quite dense.
Yeah, right. They're quite dense. A lot of words. Like, I'm not going to go read a cardiology paper and understand any of it. And so that's difficult in itself. So it's really about, the sources that you can trust by asking your friends and family. Do you trust those? And you kind of have a feeling for that, I think.
Yeah. I trusted my medical profession. You think you trust your doctors. So I had an earache right in the middle of the pandemic, and we were sort of masked, not masked. And they're washing out my ear, and this woman has her face right next to mine, and she doesn't want to wear a mask. And I said, do you feel comfortable not wearing a mask because you're breathing on me? And she was like, oh, I don't believe in all of this, and I haven't gotten a vaccine either. And I ran out of there as soon as I got done and, kind of went to complain, and then had to go back to give blood for something, and the same organization, the lady didn't believe in vaccines. And I'm like, why are you people in science? So it was like, even where I thought we would be safe, it was fascinating.
Yeah, it's really just, as scientists, all we can do, we're the ones collecting the data and trying to answer the question, right? And so all that we can do is be rigorous in how we do that. So our experimental design, is it a good design that we can actually answer the question? Are we sampling enough? Are we asking good questions? And so all we can do is do the best job that we can do in our science. And so if on the technical side, focusing that you're doing the best work of your life to get to try to answer some of these. And some of these questions, like we're talking about today, so difficult, right?
Right.
These invisible things floating in the air, and they're in birds and wildlife, and they're all over the world. I mean,
and maybe that person in Missouri stopped at a petting zoo and forgot to report it. You don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have any idea when you might get the next mutation of this flu? Because I know you're getting the reports of the disease, and then I guess you sequence it or whatever in the lab to see if it's changing. What's next for that?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is hopefully sooner than later, because we're not able to sample a lot. There's a lot of constraints for who we can sample and the animals we can sample, because there's great economic consequences sometimes if you have a farm and it was positive. And so there's a lot of impetus to not sample, and then we miss that. And so, keeping up on it is key. And we need to be better at that, as a nation, but also globally, keeping track of it.
Right. Because again, without the cooperation, we don't know as much as we need to know as fast as we can know it.
That's right. Yeah. Either, here in our backyard in New Mexico, keeping track of the avian influenza that's here now. I mean, it is here. It's not going away. And so, now keeping surveillance on it and watching it and understanding, because, it could potentially die off, which would be great. But we got to look at it and really keep track of it to understand that.
And the flu shot, of course, that we get in the fall isn't for that kind of flu.
Correct. That's for our seasonal flu. So Europe is meeting right now, actually, where they decide which type of flus go into that strain. So it's never just one subtype. It might be a couple, like 3 or 4. And so that would be then what would go into the fall vaccine strains.
Right. And if you're lucky, it matches, and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah.
They try to look at the data for okay, there may be 25 different subtypes or flus out there in a season, mostly in the southern hemisphere. And then what they try to do is okay, well, these 4 seem like the top ones.
Okay.
And so we'll put those in the vaccine. We'll have to forget all these others because you can't put them all in it. And so we'll pick the top 3 and we'll make sure that those are covered. And every now and then one of the ones that, we didn't think would be common comes up to the top, and then the vaccine is not necessarily matched.
It's just another example of how complicated science is. And it really makes you think again how almost miraculous it was that the years of work they'd done in developing the COVID vaccine was able to be brought together so that you could produce the vaccine in time for a lot of people perhaps not to die.
Yeah, well, and it was built on a foundation of decades of work, right? And so even basic science, some of these simple questions that we may have may not seem relevant, but to a big problem right at the moment, but they're a building block to either technology development or answering a question which in the future we may see, sort of like hantavirus. There was things we used that we didn't know that we would need, including the Museum of Southwest Biology and all the specimens they keep there. That was a big part of that.
Right.
And so these stories that we try to, with the foundations for, learning from the past, it's building blocks.
One of the things that was so impressive in my memory about the hantavirus investigation is that they talked to Navajo elders, to the Diné people, and they actually told stories which were then incorporated into the research.
That is part of it.
Yeah.
They did.
And
because then they could see, this has been happening.
Yep. There was a cycle.
Yeah. This isn't just a new thing.
Yeah. Someone didn't travel back from the Hantan Peninsula in Korea and bring it with them. It was here, and we just didn't know it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's what science is, learning what we didn't know, but we knew, uncovering this mystery.
Building on the scientists before them and that foundation of science in a field, but then also pulling from other fields in that foundation. And so, even though I'm sitting here with you, there's 200 scientists right behind me, from Los Alamos even, and just, we're part of these big teams because these questions that we're facing now and these challenges require these teams of people working together.
And that makes me feel a lot safer, even though it seems like we're in an era of viruses. And probably that's always been this way. We just maybe know about it more frequently now.
A part of it, yeah. And we have a rapidly changing world.
Yeah.
Between how much we all get around, like you mentioned before, to rapidly changing environment and the climate and habitats. There's a lot going on. And so the viruses and the hosts that they're in and the bacteria, they're responding just like the humans are responding. And so, it's all just a very dynamic and complex system.
And on that note, this has been another Conversations Different, and we'll be back next week. Thank you so much, Dr. Fair.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Inez. This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. We hope you're enjoying this episode of Conversations Different with Inez Russell Gomez. Great local content is only possible with a talented staff dedicated to bringing you the best local content possible. For that staff to do its work, we need your support by subscribing to the Santa Fe New Mexican. If you're already a subscriber, thank you. And if not, there's never been a better time to subscribe. In addition to our home-delivered newspaper that comes with full digital access, we also provide digital-only subscriptions for SantaFeNewMexican.com. We'll also be releasing more online-only audio and video programming moving forward. The Santa Fe New Mexican has been here for nearly 175 years, and we want to continue being your source for local news and information. Visit us at SantaFeNewMexican.com/subscribe or call us at 505-986-3010. Thank you.